Great. I see people are posting their names and affiliations and countries on the chats. Thank you so much. So, thank you again for joining us. I'm Hania Rodriguez. I am with the Third Wall Network, and today I'll be the one moderating this webinar that is organized between PHM, D2A2, and TWN. Um, Today's session aims to examine the current crisis in multilateralism with a particular focus on global health. And the context where this webinar sets is that in May 2025, during the 78th World Health Assembly, um, a reduced base budget was approved to the World Health Organization at 4.2 billion US dollars for the 2026-2027 biennium, which is over $1 billion short of what the organization had requested to fulfill its core mandate. And to unpack this, we are very happy and honored to have Dr. Andrew Harmer, Senior Lecturer at Queen Mary University of London, who has been closely following and analyzing the politics of WHO financing for many years. He has a blog. I don't know if you guys are familiar with. It is a great reading and very a pleasant reading as well, although it is a very hard topic. And while the topic may at first seem very technical or removed from daily life, it has concrete and far-reaching implications. And in the current global context, these budgetary decisions have disproportionately harmful effects on women, girls, the LGBTQIA plus communities, migrants, and other structurally marginalized populations and groups. So Dr. Andrew Harmer will unpack this, why this is happening, what it means for global health, for equity, and for politics in a wider sense. So to start, I would like to first ask a question, which I thought it was very provocative, which is on the end of his latest blog post, which is a nuance to the title of this webinar. So, Andrew, welcome. And I will dive right in. How weakened is the WHO really?
Thanks. Thanks for inviting me to talk about this very broad topic. I always start with a caveat, which is I don't work at the World Health Organization. So I don't know the ins and outs of working there. And I always imagine that if there is anybody from the WHO who reads my blog post, they must roll their eyes and go, "Oh my God, this guy knows nothing about what actually goes on." So it may be that what I'm describing isn't a reality, but that's based on my own, lack of experience at not working at the organization. I can only read the documents that are published, and I'm interested in trying to unpack some of the issues. I tend to write my blog just to get my thoughts out. It's really for me, but I'm pleased that other people read it as well. And so I was reflecting on the title of this talk, and I thought, well, okay, is the WHO in crisis? Is it weakened? My experience of climate change and being an activist in climate change is that it's easy to talk a crisis into a crisis. So I think we need to be mindful of that if we want to have a World Health Organization. Then we should be supportive of it, and we should be mindful of how we describe how it is and the situation that it is in. And if we constantly repeat the impression that the WHO is in crisis, everybody will think it's in crisis, and then we could end up with the WHO being in a crisis. So obviously there are some problems, and we'll get into the details of the the funding deficits and the impact on staffing and all of that. But I would say, just having been at the World Health Assembly this year, there were some important decisions which were approved by member states. So the 2026-2027 budget, although reduced, was approved. the assessed contributions, a second tranche of increased assessed contributions that member states had agreed to, that was approved as well. So that shows a continued commitment to flexible funding. And, you know, the DG was given flexibility in moving money around and using funds which, you know, he needed to access in order to resolve the immediate problems with salaries. So those are all positive things, I think. And I left the WHO thinking that actually the WHO was fully supported by almost all of the member states, which I think is, under the present circumstances, must be a massive relief for the Secretariat. I think the one area, so if you kind of think, is the WHO weakened, the area that I would focus most on or draw people's attention to is the assessed contributions. Having said that the member states have agreed to increase them, the annual collection rate is reducing year on year. So, you know, a couple of years ago it was in the 80%, and now it's kind of like in the low 70s. That just means that these assessed contributions, which are the most high quality contributions, and they should be available to the WHO at the very start of the biennial budget. All member states should just say, here are our assessed contributions. But, you know, the collection rate is 70%, which is not great. And the outstanding contributions are 170 million. 2 years ago, you know, they were only 90 million. So there's a problem there. And I'm not entirely sure why or what the Secretariat's going to do about it. So yeah, so that's my initial answer to your question.
Thanks, Andrew. I guess I have two follow-up questions. One is that you also mentioned in your blog that WHO has resumed to pre-COVID budget levels, right? So that may be an indication that it's not necessarily a crisis. So I just think it's an interesting point to highlight. I don't know if you like to comment on that before I move on to my next.
Sure. Yeah, no, sure. It's an interesting one. And you know, I could be making all of this up. It's just my own reflections, really. When you look at the you know, the program budget over the last few biennia, it's pretty obvious that you've had a COVID peak, and now it's returning back to its pre-COVID levels. And if you go back much further, it's kind of roughly, you know, 4.5 billion. It's pretty much kind of quite stable. That seems to be about the informal cap, if you like, on what member states seem comfortable giving the WHO. And it kind of reminded me, I guess, of the historical documents and the kind of push, and I mentioned this in my blog, but the kind of concerns by wealthy member states, and it's just a small handful of wealthy member states, they get really stressed out if they start seeing WHO budget increase. And so they basically wanted to just cap the assessed contributions. So the money which they are supposed to give the WHO as a kind of like a membership fee. They didn't want to see that going up and up and up. So they introduced a zero growth in the 80s, late 80s. And then a few years later, the WHO said, okay, not only are we going to have a zero growth on assessed contributions, it's not even going to keep up with inflation. So sure enough, up until recently, assessed contributions have been very, very, very consistent, and they just haven't increased. So it kind of feels to me like you could describe this reduction in budget, in funding, as a crisis. You know, you can see it. Wow, it was kind of like 7 or 8 billion during COVID, and now it's gone back down to 4. Ergo, it's a funding crisis. Or you could interpret it as just a return to the status quo.
Thanks. Thank you for for that and for that nuance. And so I guess before we move forward, one disclaimer that maybe I should have said in the beginning to you all is that when we were planning this webinar, we wanted this to be a conversation. So that's why Andrew doesn't have a PowerPoint, and although some numbers will appear, so that we will share his latest blog post, which breaks down in more details what he will explain here and what he's been studying for the past years and has been monitoring and monitors. So yeah, so this is more of a conversation and in another level, right, than the details. So I guess I figure not all of the people who are present here understand all of the names that float around when we talk about WHO financing. So could you maybe walk us through in very briefly and in very general terms how the WHO budget is structured and how it is funded? So you mentioned assessed contributions, right? So if you can just go over these main categories, right, and concepts, I think it would be useful for everyone.
Yeah, sure. It's a kind of like a acronym soup, isn't it, really? And by the way, I much prefer this kind of format of having a conversation. I mean, PowerPoint presentations, who wants to sit through an hour of those? Nobody. So yeah, I mean, there's the two main funding streams. There's the assessed contributions, which are the as I said, the membership fees. All member states agree to pay those, and those are just based on a basic calculation which focuses on a country's economy, size of population, whether or not it owes any debts, etc. And so that it's pretty fixed, it's pretty clear, it's predictable, and the Secretariat knows exactly how much it's going to get and when it's going to get it, in theory. The voluntary contributions have come about because of this freeze that I mentioned in the 80s and 90s. Clearly, if the assessed contributions are not going up, WHO needs to find money from elsewhere. And that's kind of where voluntary contributions started to kick in. And we've got to a situation now where, the ratio, if you like, is 20/80. So 20% of the total budget is made up of these flexible quality funds, assessed contributions, and 80% is voluntary. And the problem with voluntary contributions is that they're not predictable. They're subject to the vagaries of wealthy donors leaving, which is exactly what has happened with Trump. And they tend to be specified to particular health issues. And if you have a look at the blog, there's one of the heat maps that the WHO has recently started to publish. And you can see that some health issues get much more funding than they are budgeted for. And some issues get almost nothing. Some regions get more money than others. And there's very little that the Secretariat can do about that. It can move maybe 5% of whichever budget they're talking about to a different part of the budget, but only 5%. The rest of it just sits there. They can't really do very much with it. So you end up with something called pockets of poverty, underfunded health issues. So it's really difficult for the Secretariat to manage that. So you have a biennial budget. It's not every year, it's over 2 years. And the main strategic document that the WHO has is called the General Program of Work, and that's usually over 5 or 6 years. That has a budget. It's about 11 billion, I think, for the 2025-2028 General Program of Work. And then the biennial budgets kind of fit in over that general period. I don't know if does that cover everything? I mean, there may be other points that I can mention, but.
Well, I think if you can maybe explain the replenishment and the replenishment round, and yeah, but I think in the contributions you gave a good picture. And also if you maybe could illustrate what you're saying of how some regions get more money than others, right? And some areas as well. If you could just name what they are, what the ones that get more and the ones that get less, I think it would be important.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, there's something called a replenishment. So this is an attempt by the Secretariat to get more predictable and more flexible funding. And the idea was first floated 15 years ago by Margaret Chan, a previous Director General, but it didn't go anywhere. And it's only recently that the working group on sustainable financing, it was proposed, I think, originally by Helen Clark, the independent group that looked at pandemic preparedness and response. They recommended a replenishment round. So it was picked up by the working group on sustainable financing, and ultimately it was adopted. It's called an investment round now, and there's a page on the WHO where you can see all of these long-term investments by various member states and various non-state actors. We might come back to that later. But it's an attempt by the Secretariat to get the general program of work, so this 4-year period, to get it funded upfront, so that the Secretariat can use all of that money. And they're encouraging donors to give flexibly as much as they can. So that's the investment round. To give you an example of the heat map. So the general program of work has so for 2024, 2025, you've got 4 main areas. So, and each one has an outcome. So things like, see if I can just bring that up. I'm sure I put it here. So, you've got an outcome on improved access to quality essential health services. So that's very well funded. The total is like 111%. But if you look at something like let's see, countries prepared for health emergencies. So that's outcome 2.1, for example. If you look at how much that's funded, it's only 38% funded in Africa, 32% in the Americas. It's only so the most it's funded is in Europe, and that's 73%. But overall, across all of the regions, outcome 2.1 on health emergencies is 50% funded. But that kind of masks regions where it's significantly underfunded. So some issues are funded. So, access to health services, but things like health emergencies are seriously underfunded.
Thanks, Andrew. Since we are in this level of the conversation, maybe I guess it would be nice if we could go into the picture of the current picture of WHO and the budget cuts that WHO has suffered. So what is the scale of the challenge that we have ahead, to use your own words, and where in WHO, right, these areas that you mentioned, where are the biggest blows, where is it most affected? And maybe if you can point, I don't know if you can, how what are the implications that this might bring?
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting to see the downward trajectory of the program budget 2026, 2027. So last year, the Secretariat had a discussion with the regional offices. So I don't know whether you're aware, but in terms of the structure of the organization, you've got the headquarters, then you've got the regional offices, and then you've got the country offices. So the regional offices each have a director. So the Secretariat goes and has a chat with the regional offices and says, okay, let's have a chat about the budget for 2026, 2027. And they said, oh, great, okay, let's have 5.7 billion. Secretariat said, you must be joking. You can only have 5.3. So the Secretariat took that to the Executive Board in January and said, okay, can we have 5.3? Program, Budget and Administration Committee said, I don't think so. You can have 4.9. And then I don't know what happened, but, Tedros, went off with his 4.9 billion. And then a few months later announced, actually, it's going to be 4.3. I don't know what happened between the Executive Board. I mean, I guess Trump withdrew, right? So, but he'd withdrawn before the Executive Board met. But I mean, I don't know, maybe that he had a conversation and it just became apparent informally that the 4.9 budget wasn't going to be approved, and that actually he needed to make it significantly less. That might account for the buoyant attitude of the member states of the World Health Assembly. 4.2, great, we're really happy with that. It's not 4.9. Yeah, so that's it's reduced significantly, and I guess at the same time, and this is what I find most disappointing, I think, is that over COVID, maybe the WHO kind of thought, we're getting this extra money, we can do something here, and it started to kind of expand, I guess, if you like, and it started to spend more money because it was there and it started to spend it. And now suddenly the revenues significantly dried up. The voluntary contributions have fallen through the floor. And it's facing this kind of financing gap, revenue versus expenses of 450 million. On top of that, it still has to fully fund its 2024-2025 budget. It's nearly there. It's 98%. I can't remember. But it hasn't quite got there. So there's still like 4% left, and that totals about 210 million. So overall, the scale of the financial crisis, if you like, is about 660 million. The big worry, which was really stressing everybody else at the World Health Assembly, was how are we going to pay for the staff? Because, obviously without salary, staff, it's going to be really, really difficult. So they've kind of managed to cover that. The salary gap was, I don't know, 350, something like that. But they've managed to just about cover it by moving money around from different funds. So I think that crisis, if you want to call it a crisis, has been averted. But I mean, Trump has, and I assume he's going to follow through. I mean, he might not. I mean, he seems to change his mind about everything else. So maybe he'll change his mind about withdrawing from the WHO. I guess he's probably still seeing it as leverage, and he may yet still want to do deals with the WHO and say, look, you need to do this, this, and this, and make these reforms within, and then you can have my money. So that might still happen. I don't know, but at the moment, the major donor is walking away. So that means the assessed contributions of 123. The voluntary contributions, 337. That's every year, 460 million. That's not going to happen. That's not going to appear next year. So, there's going to be some, it's difficult. It's just going to be difficult. And I don't really know how it's going to pan out. We'll have to wait and see, I guess. Yeah, so I don't know if that helps. I mean, I guess, so yeah, the staffing issue, I mean, there's some text in the midterm review of 2024-2025 budget, which is, it's quite alarming. And I mean, I don't really know how to interpret it, but basically it just says, although there's a 317 million salary cap, it describes it as there's an aggregated operational funding deficit. Now, I've got no idea what that means. Maybe somebody does who's here, but they have that as 581 million, which is much more than 317, but I don't know what that means. So, you know, I think there are still question marks over the salary, and we'll have to wait and see what happens there, really.
Thanks. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, I think you reminded me of an article that came out, I guess, like 2 years ago about global health nonsense and how it's so filled with with words, made up words and words from entrepreneurial vocabulary that makes us even more confused. It is a by the way.
Wait till we get to the discussion around the outcomes, then we can see some real nonsense.
So thank you so much. I think when I went through the budget presentation that was presented in the EB and then was adopted in the World Health Assembly, I remember, maybe I'm not correct, but I remember that in absolute terms, I think the Africa region was one that had the less, between regions, had the less, had, I don't know if you had the bigger cuts in funds, not relatively, but in absolute terms, I think. I don't know if you didn't mention regions. I don't know if you have this information in the tip of your tongue of how regions were affected, how the regional budgets were affected by these cuts.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember. There is, I mean, I can start scurrying around trying to find the graph, but maybe that's not going to do.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
That's not going to look.
And I think there's also, I think I also read this in the Geneva Health Files. I will find it and share here with everyone.
I think it's the Americas. I think I know that maybe one of the reasons, so we were talking about the investment round, and one of the reasons why none of the Americas region countries have contributed to the investment round, and they haven't, even Brazil, which hosted the first investment round. One of the reasons may be because they can see how little money they're getting relative to the other regions. So that might be one explanation. But maybe there is another explanation, which I don't know. It looks like Nicoletta's.
Yeah, no, and I remember at the Chile was made a statement on it, on how the Americas had one of the smallest budgets. Yeah. So, but I will try to see where I found from where I remember this information and share before the webinar ends. So maybe in this topic, while I was analyzing this, the budget proposed, right, and that it was adopted, I found this priority setting exercise. And for me, I was only reading the 2026-2027 biennium exercise. So I didn't have a reference, right? But it felt a bit odd. And it was great to read in your blog because you compare the 2024-2025 and the 2026-2027 bienniums priority setting exercises and revealed how there are like inconsistencies between the priorities that were offered for member states to vote on. So could you maybe explain to us the main differences between these priority exercise, what they mean, and the possible reasoning behind the Secretariat's push for some areas to be prioritized and not others?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've only recently kind of started to look at the priority setting exercise just because it took up so much space in the 2026-2027 program budget. And it draws on so the first time that they did this, that the Secretariat did this, was for the previous budget, so 2024-2025. That comes off the back of the previous general program of work. So between these two priority setting exercises, we've switched from one general program of work to a new one. And each general program of work has got its own separate health outcomes and outcomes and strategic objectives. So it just makes it impossible to make comparisons across the two. But I just thought it was interesting how each of the health outcomes was described and which of them the member states were prioritizing. And it's pretty obvious in the 2024-2025 exercise that health emergencies are super important to member states. They're mentioned twice, so 2 health outcomes appear in the top 5. Countries prepared for health emergencies and health emergencies rapidly detected and responded to. So that I thought, okay, that's interesting. And when you look at which health issues are being funded, the health emergencies is significantly underfunded. So there's a mismatch between the priorities being identified and the amount of funding that member states end up giving. So much of it is specified, and these kind of issues that member states think are important just don't get the funding that they need. When you compare the health outcomes for the latest exercise for 2026-27, you kind of see, I mean, it's completely different wording. It's just completely different. So it makes it really difficult to compare. But you just see different health issues. You've got 2 non-communicable disease-focused health issues. I mean, NCDs weren't mentioned at all in the original in the first exercise. So, but it's just noticeable that they are flagged here. Health emergencies does creep into the top 5, but it's worded very differently. And it's basically just it's described in terms of surveillance and monitoring, risk assessment, and those kind of very passive activities that you can do behind a desk. But if you, I just wanted to kind of quote this one health outcome, because if you can make sense of it, then you're much better than I am. But so this is outcome 4.1. Equity in access to quality services improved for non-communicable diseases, mental health conditions, and communicable diseases while addressing antimicrobial resistance. So
all of that while addressing
that's one outcome. I mean, how are you supposed to prioritize that? And which parts of it are you prioritizing, and how would you measure it? Even if it's kind of, so that just made me kind of think, oh my God, are these people? I mean, I either then the people that draft it, I don't want to be mean, but it just feels like this is very elaborate and it's very confusing, and it just seems quite. I mean, anybody who's kind of familiar with drafting health outcomes would be appalled by this one because it's impossible. So I just don't know why it was written like that. Is it to merge all of these things together so that the things that aren't being funded, you won't notice that they're not being funded, because you can just point to outcome 4.1 and say, yeah, there's lots of money going to outcome 4.1, even though all of the money goes to communicable diseases and none of it goes to non-communicable diseases? I don't know. You can start getting quite conspiratorial about it. But it's just interesting to compare. And I think more work needs to be done in looking into the details here. It raises lots of issues around if you're interested in power, and how things get done and why priorities get set, this is a good example because you can see agenda setting very clearly, I think. It's presenting a choice, but the choice has been manufactured in advance. And so you're only given a constructed set of options. And arguably, you could see this as the, Luke's second phase of power agenda setting.
Thank you, Andrew. I think we can get like a little bit conspirational.
Yeah.
And I guess so from this exercise, what we saw was that one aspect that was deprioritized was addressing structural, political, and socioeconomic determinants of health to the detriment, no, in contrast to other areas. So maybe could you explain to us like how do you interpret this agenda setting and this possible future WHO agenda? Is this push new to put these kinds of aspects, these more structural aspects, deprioritized? From what can you say that from your experience and from your studies?
I don't think it's new. So you've got the limited amount of money, and then you've got these debates around what does WHO do, and they're kind of interlinked. There are people that want the WHO to do more, and in order to do more, they need more money. There are people who want the WHO to do more, but in order to do more, they need to make the money that they've got work differently. And then I guess there are people that just want the WHO to be reined in and do just like a particular set of things. And there are ideological reasons why those pressures might come to bear. Some member states don't want WHO telling them what to do, advising, setting standards, saying, look, these are the essential medicines that you need to have, etc. So there's different narratives running through the documents, I think, and so you've probably come across this phrase core functions. So people always talk about WHO's core functions. I mean, if you go back to the WHO's mandate, its actual basic document, its constitution, the word core doesn't appear once. There's no such word as core in the WHO's constitution. The word core has kind of been extrapolated from the 22 functions that appear in the basic document. And in the 11th General Programme of Work, so going back to 2006, these core functions were articulated. They appear in that document, and they've extracted from the 22 functions 6, which are providing leadership, shaping the research agenda, setting norms and standards, providing technical support, monitoring the health situation, and assessing health trends. So these are the kind of things that are repeated over and over again, so that they become a fact. They become a reality. This is what the WHO does, and it makes it difficult to break out of that mold, if you like. Some of the things that trigger diplomats is when you start to talk about what the WHO can do on the ground, whether it has operational functionality, and I think that the health emergencies program and the health emergencies appeal, I think it's very much about operational activities. It comes across that way when you look at the documentation and you look at the activities that it does. It operates in country, but this is very much a trigger word, and there's a move, I think. And again, I'm being conspiratorial here, but I feel that when I look at the way that health emergencies are described as health outcomes and health outputs, in the 2026-2027 program budget. It feels as though the operational element of health emergencies is slowly being eroded. So it's really about, you know, questions around what does the WHO do? What should it do? And I think importantly, what could it do under different circumstances and under a different mindset, which didn't keep throwing the word reality back in the organization's face. Because you see this all the time. It's realism, realism, realism. And it's not realistic for the WHO to have any more money. It's not realistic for the WHO to do more than the funding available. It's not realistic for the WHO to start working in country. But says who? Who says that it's realistic? It's a social construction which has come about through the dynamic between the WHO as an international organization and its member states. But member states can learn to do things. They can learn to do things differently. And I would encourage them to do that.
Thank you, Andrew. I was going to ask if you could answer your own question, and I guess you kind of did. And I know you have more, you have writings that you go deeper into this, right? I don't know if you want to address this now, because I would like to move to the next questions as well, because I was going to ask, my next question planned was about the voluntary contributions, right? And how a lot of the funding, a lot of the contributors that fund WHO, there is a very large concentration, and how this influences the organization's independence. And a lot of people on the Q&A, I don't know if you can open the Q&A, have asked questions around this, about WHO's independence, about relying on transnational corporations, on health harming industries, as Patty puts it. So maybe if you can answer that, I think this is something that interests people a lot.
Yeah, sure. No, it's a really important issue. I haven't looked at the chat yet. I'll probably read it all. And what's this? Andrew Harmer has no idea what he's talking about. Who wrote that? No, I'm joking. Nobody's written. No. Yeah. So I was just looking before we came onto this call. So thanks to the US withdrawing, the top 10 contributors. So Gates is now at the top again. The UK is second. Side point on the UK, it's all of its funding now is flexible. So if other countries think, is it possible for me to just contribute flexible funding? Yes, it is, and the UK has done it. It's the second biggest funder, and all of its funding is either in assessed contributions or core voluntary contributions, which are essentially completely flexible. So second is UK. Gavi is third. Germany is fourth, and the EC is fifth. China is down at 10th. So we're back to this kind of question around, oh, Gates is contributing the most money to WHO, therefore it's everything that the WHO does is down to Gates. I don't really think that that's how influence works. I mean, it seems intuitive, doesn't it? If you give more money, therefore you have more influence. And there is a push now through the Working Group on Sustainable Financing. The question of alignment is a major concept in sustainable financing now, and they want to align donor priorities with WHO priorities. And the argument is we contribute, so we need to have a say in how the money gets spent. Historically, that was just limited to member states, but the push now is to give that invitation to non-state actors. So the worry is that non-state actors are now going to have a say in how their money is spent. And this, of course, is problematic. So ironically, the Working Group on Sustainable Finance is saying, look, the fact that the WHO is dependent on a small number of donors, that's a problem. That makes the WHO vulnerable to allegations that it's being influenced. At the same time, it's opening up this alignment issue to non-state actors and inviting them in to have a say because they're contributing more. So this kind of vulnerability, it's kind of there's a contradiction there, I think, in it. I don't think that's how influence works. I know that people disagree with me on this, but it's an easy equation. If you give more money to WHO, therefore you have more influence. But influence doesn't work like that, in my view. And if you look at Tine Hanrider and colleagues have done a lot of work on this and looked at the role of lobbying. Yes, maybe the Gates does influence, but it does that through lobbying groups like consultancy companies that advise the WHO on what to do about this or that. You end up with the lobbying groups advising, and they know that if they advise things which their funders, one of which is Gates, doesn't agree with, that funder isn't going to fund a lobbying group, so they have to advise in a way which aligns with the interests of foundations. If you look at the investment round, there's a lot of banks. And they all seem to be weirdly donating exactly the same amount of money, $10 million. So you've got the African Development Bank, Central African Bank, European Investment Bank, etc. And there's also a lot of foundations are contributing to the investment round. The WHO Foundation, that's the biggest, 64.5 million, completely opaque. Where does he get its money from? Nobody knows. Wellcome Trust, 50 million. But I mean, does the influence come from the Wellcome Trust because it's contributing 50 million, or just the fact that, what's his face? Who was the head of the Wellcome Trust is now working at one of the most senior positions in WHO. The influence isn't going to come through the money, it's going to come from the position. So if you think that the Wellcome Trust is influencing the WHO, you're right, and that's because it's just employed somebody who used to work there and run it. So it's complicated. I don't particularly buy into the argument that just because you're contributing a load of money, you therefore influence. I think it happens elsewhere.
Thank you, Andrew. I think sometimes it's easy to bump into simple explanations, right, of the influence. I think it's important that you make it more complex. We have a lot of questions and comments in the chat. I would love if people would like to raise their hands, and we'll give you the space to maybe voice your questions if you'd like. But we also have a question from Anthony. I don't know if you can see it, Andrew, which is in the past, when the US refused to contribute its assessed contribution, only 20% in any case, several European countries and some other countries compensated for that loss. Do you think the EU and the BRICS nations will chip in and compensate this gap?
Yeah, so the WHO, it isn't going down that route. It's presented a new budget taking into account that this money that the US was going to contribute isn't going to happen. So it's completely recalibrated its budget. It's not expecting other countries to step in. It just means that the ambition for more flexible funding, so increasing the amount of assessed contributions going to the base segment, increasing it by 50% by 2030, it isn't going to happen. Unfortunately, it's going to, maximum maybe 30%. And that's because there's no expectation that other countries will chip in, as Anthony was saying. I mean, it would be great if they decided to. And what they need to do is increase their flexible voluntary contributions. I don't think they're going to increase their assessed contributions by any more than they've agreed to. But if they increase their core voluntary contributions, the most flexible, that would be the best way that they could chip in if they wanted to. And I'm sure everybody would be delighted if they did.
Great. Patty has raised her hand, so I will give her the floor. And she's been very active in the Q&A and on the chat. Hi, Patty.
Hi there. Thank you, Andrew. It's really, really interesting to see you. I, you know, the questions that I put in the Q&A are trying to understand that recently, in my blogs, I've been saying, oh, actually, it's brilliant that the member states have been so rallying around WHO and agreeing to increase their funding. And I was talking to Alison Katz about it. She couldn't believe it. Somebody who used to work for WHO and is a long-time member of G2H2. I don't think she's on the call today. But she said that should be really sort of, because it is something. And maybe we should be a little bit more shouting about that actually member states are, at least maybe everybody's got no money. I mean, we know that they're all sort of crying that they haven't got any money, but we should be making a little bit more about that, I think. And we should, I don't know, you're indicating that maybe Trump will come back and the US might come back, and maybe they will. All I'm saying is without them there, we managed to get through a whole load of stuff. We managed to get through a great resolution that the US had been trying to eliminate all the great things that were in it, like regulation of bad industries and conflicts of interest proposal. We got them through quite easily, but it was without, you could say it's without global consensus, except that the WHO person said, don't say that. You know, the US was still a member state all this year. They just kept quiet. So my question to you, which is a very long round circulate thing, is do we really want them back in? Do we need them back in? Is it something that we should all be thinking about? And should WHO be compromising to such an extent to get them back in if it's offered? I mean, it's a really big question, because all the 45 years I've been working with WHO, we've been clashing with the US. It's not just Trump. It's forever we've clashed with the US. It's just been non-stop, because everything that IBFAN has stood for has been calling for regulation, conflicts of interest safeguards, all getting WHO to stay true to its mandate, which we think is norm setting along with everything else. So I'll shut up, but it's a question in my mind, you know, should WHO be tackling these issues that are always going to be really problematic for it in terms of trade and growth and all the other things that you need to do to control the corporations, which are a major problem to world health.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my answer is, you know, and I'm sure the Secretariat would want WHO to be supporting, would want the United States to be supporting it. I very much hope that if there were, you know, we'll come back as long as you do this and this and this, that the Secretariat has the confidence and courage not to do that. And just say you can come back, but, you know, you're not going to start setting the terms. Thanks very much. So that, yeah, that would be it. I agree. This idea that member states have no money is total bullshit. They're very happy to spend huge amounts of money on everything else, but not weirdly health, even though it's economically a very sensible thing to do. But just in terms of doing the right thing, it's doing the right thing, and they're weirdly just not doing that, and then lying through their teeth and saying that they don't have enough money. So I don't buy into that. Interestingly, I don't know whether you've done any looking into Roche, because I was wondering, Roche is very supportive of NCDs, and I just noticed that NCDs are, you know, becoming more of a prominent health issue, but I want to be looking more at Roche these days, just to see how that organization is influencing the way that
NCD. Bloomberg is coming forward a lot as well. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much, Andrew. Yeah,
That's
I haven't looked into Roche at all, but I mean, we're really worried about, you know, the private sector actually setting the agenda, and I think a lot of G2H2 are the same, that we want to stick to the main mandate. But it's very interesting that you dissected what the core constitutional mandate is and when these core things and what we think of as core, are they really core? And what should they be? Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you,
Okay.
Patty. I will give the floor now to Andreas, who has raised his hand. Hello.
Hello, it's working.
Yes.
Do you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I also put it on the chat. I think it's maybe Andrew. What is worrying of the US leaving is not just the money wise. This, of course, is the immediate effect. But what we understand is that also the collaboration with US health institutions, scientific institutions, is hampered by the gag rule that the Trump administration put on the NHS and the National Institutes of Health, etc. So this is something worrying in also hindering, crippling the work of WHO. Could you comment on this? And maybe a second question on it. This idea to bring functions and departments out of Geneva into other places of WHO, much cheaper places, might also could be seen as a decolonizing of this global institution. Would you agree with this, or this is just pipe dreams and with having no effect? Thank you.
Yeah, sure, Andreas. I think, I mean, I agree with you with the US staff. I don't really know enough to comment on that as to how it's going to impact how things are done with that kind of technical expertise removed. I guess I don't know how to comment on that just at the moment. Moving locations, that was floated around. I don't think it'll go anywhere. I don't imagine Geneva would allow that, given that, you know, it's so heavily dependent for its economy on having the WHO there and other UN agencies. But that's a slightly what's the word? Anyway, I don't think it's going to happen. And on the decolonizing front, I mean, you could just imagine it, you know, the organization moving to a kind of like an expat part of a wealthy city in another country, and just replicating all of the inequality that exists anyway. So I don't know. I honestly, I don't think that's going to happen. There are some hubs. So all of the hubs that were described, that's a new thing. Japan, Germany, India, focusing on different issues. I don't know if you were thinking about that, Andreas, but these are kind of things which seem, at least there's some kind of rationale for doing that. But I don't think it's for decolonizing rationale, but it seemed like an interesting development to me. Sorry, I can't say more on that one.
Okay. Gopa also has his hand raised.
Thank you, Rani, and thank you for the presentation and discussion, and Andrew. So one question and one broad comment, sort of sharing an info. As we hear that the human resource aspect of WHO, which is going to be slimmed, I heard that different numbers, around 9,000 employees, and another 3,500 consultant. So around 12,500, that is what the total strength of human resource, that is what I was told, but I think there might be variations. But the idea is that to bring down the number of employees from the current number to 2,000, around 2,000 to 2,500 less. So that will be around 7,000. That's a plan to reduce it. And consultant also are supposed to go, but how many of them will go, we do not know. But the formula presented early in April was 50% of the top kind of people will go, around 40% of the directors will go, then around 20% of the staff is supposed to go. So this is the formula, but the first two levels have already done. And the second level, now the various departments are presenting their reformed organogram. That is happening. So far only 200 other staffs have gone, but most of the cut will be at the headquarters level. So now coming, to connecting from Andrew's question. So all crisis offers various opportunities. You reform to the, for the good, and or you can be, much more in a worse situation. But I think the signals are showing, to the second option. So it is going to be more in a path where, becoming vulnerable for more regulatory capture kind of situation. So one example I'll give, and I would like to know Andrew's response also. You might have, all of you might have heard about this Novo Foundation's donation. Novo Foundation donated around 3 million earlier, and then they pledged another $57 million to fill the gap. So this is a very worrisome development, because Novo Nordisk holds 70% of the voting rate in the Novo Nordisk, the pharmaceutical company, and which is now, most of you are aware that the largest selling, one of the largest top selling medicine for weight loss, and a huge kind of capitalization in the share market due to that breakthrough. So this is fully controlled by, the Novo Nordisk is fully controlled by the Novo Nordisk Foundation, which is a kind of a, as per the WHO's engagement of rules with the non-state actors, this should be considered as a private sector. And that private sector is now being termed as a, what you call a philanthropic foundation, and WHO is directly going to take that money. So this will have far-reaching implications, but we do not know in which sector that money is going, what kind of activities that are going. So if this kind of money is going to come to fill the gap, this may lead to or put serious questions on the integrity and independence of WHO. So I would like to know your response.
What am I going to say? Yeah, so just on the staffing, the figures I've got were the same as yours. So 9,463 down to 7,525. So mostly P1 and P3 staff. So that's a 20% reduction. Yeah. It was pretty tragic being at the World Health Assembly. I did get the chance to speak to Jim Campbell, who's heading the WHO HR workforce. And he was basically just saying goodbye to all of his staff, which was really sad. They all knew that this was their last World Health Assembly. And you got a lot of that, a lot of precarity, a lot of anxiety, and it was really sad to see all of that. I can't remember if it was Fiona Godley who described WHO staff as the worker bees of the organization. I think it was her. And it's just really, really tragic that you see these people who've worked there for so long losing their jobs. Yeah, it's interesting. The Novo Nordisk one, 57 million. It's a good point, Gopal. I think changing your name or not being a private, dodging fencer by branching out into philanthropic work is an interesting way of getting in through the back door. I wasn't quite sure what your question was, but I just think we need to start, and I know that a lot of people are doing this, but we need to start tracking the money, seeing where it's going. because there's a lot of funding coming in from these non-state actors now, and it's important to do this investigative work. And I suspect the fencer is going to become a really hot topic going forward, and I think we need to be vigilant.
Thank you, Andrew. I think you mentioned some very impressive figures when we had a meeting, right, to organize this webinar, and also in your post of quoting Tedros about how the funding of WHO represents like nothing in regards to security budgets. So maybe if you could, do you have this quote in your, like, on the tip of your tongue that you could maybe share with us?
The quote, did you say?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. So it was interesting, right? I was when I was preparing for this talk, I was just looking at Chorev's book, and I mean, as I mentioned in my blog, it must be immensely frustrating for any director general to have to work within such constraints, such tight constraints. You know, so you've got Mahler in the 1980s raging against the US's unpaid contributions to the organization. You know, just howling into the wind. He doesn't understand why the US is withholding its mandatory contributions, and he says rather pointedly, surely it cannot be the influence of commercial lobbies who falsely believe the WHO is blocking their expansion. So that was Mahler back in the 1980s. And then you've got Tedros, which, I mean, I can quote it if you want, if this is the one you're asking. So this is what he said at the WHO just a few months ago. For an organization working on the ground in 150 countries, with the vast mission and mandate the member states have given us, 4.2 billion for 2 years, or 2.1 billion a year, is not ambitious. It's extremely modest. I hope you will agree with me, and I will tell you why. 2.1 billion is the equivalent of global military expenditure every 8 hours. 2.1 billion is the price of one stealth bomber to kill people. And 2.1 billion is 1/4 of what the tobacco industry spends on advertising and promotion every single year. And again, a product that kills people. It seems somebody switched the price tags on what is truly valuable in our world. And I just think that's brilliant. It just completely nails it. You know, how dare member states complain that they can't give more money to the World Health Organization when they just, without a second thought, you know, buy a stealth bomber here, a stealth bomber there, you know, loads and loads of drones to go and kill people. It's just disingenuous and just lies, and it's sad because they're undermining their own the health of their populations, and it's just crazy, and I don't believe it. So
Thanks. Thank you for reading out loud to us that. I think it was a very powerful remark, and I think we should repeat it as long as we can. And Patty has raised her hand again, so I'll give her the floor, and then I'll.
Only if someone else doesn't want to, but it was just that whole thing about where we should go as G2HU, because Ipfan has said from the very beginning of FENSA and before that, you know, it was just wrong that only, you know, tobacco and arms are identified as a conflict of interest, truly as a conflict of interest. The whole gamut of everything else is let in through FENSA, and even though you have guidelines and books and this, that, and the other, and when I've raised it and said, come on, let's look at FENSA and let's make sure WHO looks clearly at its conflicts of interest policy, which is not good, it's not sound. They just said, shut up, you'll lose FENSA altogether if you do that. I don't know, but I personally, I think if you're saying, Andrew, that FENSA is going to get more important, and I think it always has been important, but, you know, I think we need to be together, and maybe it's something that G2H2 can discuss or whatever at another time, but it's something that needs to be looked at, because through the back door all this will happen, and we'll lose everything. And I totally with you on the ability of member states to pay their dues. I think they're just not doing it properly, and they're just being focused on all the false messages that this is hugely expensive for them, and it can't be. It's really, really, you know, incorrect analysis of what they need to be doing. Okay, thanks. Okay. And I mean, while I've got I mean, we've seen that with all the things with scaling up nutrition and all the others, the way that the companies get in is so subtle and not at all to do with amounts of money. It's to do with influence and setting the agenda and changing things to suit companies and get them more involved in policy setting. That's our experience over a long time. Thanks.
Thanks, Patty.
Yeah.
Would you like to answer her directly, Andrew, or?
Too difficult.
Can you?
I didn't put a clear question, did I?
Yeah, I wasn't sure.
It was,
a clear
and
question to G2H2 and PHM and all of us to think, well, do we look at FENSA again, or is FENSA enough of a safeguard? Because they talk about it as a safeguard, but actually it isn't. You know,
It's noticeable. It's noticeable just how often FENSA was mentioned in the documentation from the Working Group on Sustainable Financing. It was almost as if they're using it as a justification
exactly
for what they kind of suspect they shouldn't be doing. And so I just think that I mean, again, I don't want to make too much of this. I'm sure it's not a thing, but it reminded me of Gopal's point about Novo Nordisk and the weight loss drug and non-communicable diseases. And I just do wonder whether there's a connection here between NCDs becoming much more of a health issue or of a health priority. Foundations who have an interest in NCDs now have a voice, now are able to articulate their interests through the investment round, and therefore we're getting more of a private sector influence generally within some of the decision making in the organization.
Exactly. And in fact, they were there. You know, when you take it to the UN General Assembly, which is coming up on NCDs, you know, all those things that we were pushing to get conflicts of interest safeguards WHO has been very much more outspoken, certainly in our issue, about keeping policy setting clear from conflict, commercial influence. It's really good. Actually the penny has dropped with our section of WHO. I don't know whether it extends right the way through on all the things, but we're seeing much better and braver statements coming out of WHO, and that's what we'd like to see. But it's, you know, the UN General Assembly zero draft is really weak, and we need to keep an eye on it. Okay, thanks.
Good. I'm just looking through I was able to look through the chat now. I was looking at the wrong Q&A, but now I'm looking at the chat. Thank you, Peter, for reminding me that the head of the Wellcome Trust was Jeremy Farrar. Fancy forgetting his name.
Who has a huge job now. He's got a massive job with WHO, hasn't he? Yeah, enormous.
So I guess to wrap up, we are a bit over time, but we also knew this would happen. We set out 1 hour, but we knew that was not how long this conversation would take. But maybe to wrap up, a lot of the most recent questions revolve around like step forward, next steps, and how can civil society and the regions, also member states, act on this. So Andrew, maybe you can answer this very easy question, and and maybe give your final remarks, and we can close.
So I always push for I'm in the more money for who camp. Probably a minority of one these days, but there is interest in the literature and various influencers. Helen Clark, for example, they are interested in global public investment, and that is an issue that's coming through some of the literature. Mariana Mazzucato and her kind of group that looked at health economics recently for the WHO. I just think we do need a new narrative. I don't think we should let go of the idea that WHO could do more with more money. And I would be pushing to develop that narrative, perhaps through GPI, but on the understanding that it's not just about quality, it's actually about quantity as well. And the idea that you could present to the WHO could present to the world, okay, you want us to make the world a healthier place. Well, this is how much we can do if you give us 10 billion. This is how much we can do if you give us 15. This is how much we can do if you give us 20. Imagine how much healthier and better the world would be if we had those resources, and you need to trust us to do something good with it. I feel that narrative needs to be protected and promoted, because otherwise we just kind of lose something which I think is kind of important and valuable.
Thank you so much, Andrew. This conversation was very insightful, and it was delightful as well. I've shared a few times the blog post. I will share it again. We hope to maybe host other sessions like this. So be mindful of TWN's D2A2 and PHM's social media and emails as well. Thank you so much. We will share the recording